Number 5 on this list is the Borobudur Temple. Borobudur Temple is located in Indonesia and is frankly extremely beautiful. It's located on the island of Java and is one of the biggest Buddhist temples in the entire world. It truly looks like something from a legend or from something directly out of an Indiana Jones movie. Now, it was built many hundreds of years ago between 780 AD and 840 AD during the Selandria dynasty. There's a lot of lore that surrounds this temple and a ton of mystery. Located in a very remote location, it kind of got forgotten about for several hundred years. Then in 1970, it was almost rediscovered by UNESCO, and it was decided that they would try and rejuvenate it to its former glory. Now, during the process of rediscovering this beauty, they also rediscovered the darker side of this place, which has people believing at least at one point the devil may have been hiding here. Gruesome visuals etched into the interior of this temple depicting some just horrible things. Torture, beheadings, displays of sheer violence that I can't get into detail on YouTube about. Some awful drawings showing what would have gone down here at one point in history. Also, along with these acts of violence, some drawings that seem to point to the presence of the devil. Drawings looking at potential rituals that would have been performed in honor of this devil. People worshipping the devil and praising him, all of that. Nowadays, it's pretty understood that this place no longer hides the devil. But for several hundred years, it's very possible this could have been a bit of a stronghold for either the devil or another evil spirit. Number 4 on this list is the Chernobyl Church. Now, I imagine a lot of you have heard about Chernobyl before, the devastating accident that went down in Ukraine back in 1986. If you aren't familiar, then basically a huge nuclear power plant exploded, which caused the worst nuclear accident the world has ever seen. It killed 31 people right off the bat, and then several more over the years from radioactive poisoning. That area where the blast occurred has been closed off to the public, and rightfully so. It's literally still radioactive to this day, and if people were to go into the 20-mile radius that's closed and then proceeded to stay there for an extended period of time, they would certainly feel the negative effects of doing so. All of this has left for a very creepy abandoned city vibe that looks like something straight out of the apocalypse. Most of the buildings here are horribly worn down and starting to fall apart. After all, it's been over 30 years and no one has looked after them at all. Which is why it's very strange to see the church in this village still in perfect condition. Recently, somebody entered into the radiation zone and went into this church. They were shocked to see that the church itself on the inside was still in perfect form. Even though everything around it has been hit hard with decay, this building still remains how it was. Why? Well, the person taking these photos didn't know, and they didn't stay too long to find out. Apparently, after entering, it wasn't long before they started to feel a very ominous presence. Something deep and dark and sinister lurking here, not wanting to be found. As if entering the church woke whatever this thing was from its slumber, and it wasn't ready to be woken. This individual got out of there as fast as possible and didn't want to investigate further, but it got me thinking that this church might be hiding the devil. A horrible accident occurs where tons of people perish. The whole city gets abandoned and no one can come into this area for over 30 years. And this one flimsy little church is still totally intact and looking pristine. It seems a little bit too suspicious for me. If this is the case and this church is hiding the devil, then we can take it a bit further too. Now the real question comes out about how the Chernobyl accident really went down. Maybe the devil, or whatever demonic creature is living in this church, had some role to play. Number 3 on this list is Greyfriars Kirk and Churchyard. This church is located in Edinburgh in Scotland. History Hit says, with the Kirk tracing its origin to 1598 and the graveyard dating back even further to the 1560s, Greyfriars Kirk and Churchyard in Edinburgh is said to be one of the most haunted religious sites in the world. Known for body snatching and violent ghosts, the famously fearsome site has even been referred to by Scottish poet Robert Louis Stevenson. The site's most famous ghost is Mackenzie poltergeist George Mackenzie, who is known during his lifetime as a ruthless person persecutor of Scottish Covenanters, a Presbyterian movement in the 17th century. His spirit was reportedly released in 1999 when a homeless man looking for somewhere to sleep broke into his final resting place, the Black Mausoleum. Next to this mausoleum is the former Covenanters prison, which housed some 1,200 members of a failed anti-government revolution in 1679. Only 257 prisoners came out alive, with the remaining dead sent to haunt the churchyard. This church is haunted by so much negative energy that people around the area believe it's actually attracted the devil. Basically, all of this evil has gotten the devil's attention, and it's possible that one of those evil spirits that's hiding out is the devil in disguise. It's also believed that the devil may have released all of these demonic spirits to keep people away from this place, as he's doing something sinister. We may never know for sure though. Number 2 on this list is the Church of St. Mary the Virgin. This church is located in Bedfordshire, England, and could very easily be a hiding spot for the devil. Bedfordshire Live says, the Church of St. Mary the Virgin in Clop Hill, Bedfordshire was abandoned for about 170 years after it fell into disuse in the 1840s. During this time, the church fell into ruin as it lost its roof and became a focal point for vandalism, antisocial behavior, and, according to ghost hunters, black magic. Over the years, many people have reported seeing strange things near this church, from mysterious hooded monks to tall dark figures. The 14th century church was reportedly used for satanic rituals in the 1960s. As rumor has it, bones were dug up and arranged in satanic patterns. Damien Odell, head of the Anglia Paranormal Investigation Society, theorizes that the hauntings are what remain of black magic rituals from many years ago. He explained, there's definitely something strange going on at the church, and my personal view is that it's down to black magic practices held there. I think it's possible for a group of Satanists to conjure up something and leave it behind. A sort of guardian or elemental. He added, if this is the case, it certainly does its job because it frightens the living daylight out of people. Other theories speculate that it's haunted because it's facing the wrong way. Churches traditionally face east, the direction from which the sun rises, which is associated with the location of heaven. However, because St. Mary the Virgin faces away from God, it's said to have opened up its doors to hell. Many locals have thought that this church is the literal church of the devil because of all the sightings and the fact that it's facing towards hell rather than where it should be facing. Even if it isn't the devil that is here, it's clear that there is some sort of demonic presence for sure. Personally, I would avoid this church at all costs if I was you. And finally, number 1 on this list is Egg Hill Church. Egg Hill Church is one of the creepiest and scariest churches on this list, and it's for good reason. The church is located in Pennsylvania and has seen a horrifying atrocity committed there in the past. Before I even get into the tragedy that went down here, let's just take a look at this place and how creepy it is. It's this small barn-looking structure that doesn't look to be in good repair at all. It's got a few gravestones sitting out front of it, and it's relatively in the middle of nowhere. It looks like the sort of place where a serial killer would be lurking, or in this case, maybe even the devil. In the early 1900s, this place hosted a horrifying mass murder. The pastor of this church held a congregation, gathering everyone in the surrounding areas to this church. When they were all inside, he chained the door shut and murdered everyone. He wasn't just interested in his visitors though, because right after he was done with that, he took his own life as well. This was obviously a major shock to the community when it happened, but even to this day, it's left people baffled. The pastor apparently never showed this sick and sadistic nature in his character before, and this act of terror came out of thin air. That's why people have speculated before that he may not have been acting by himself. It's very possible that it was him in the flesh, but not in the mind. That his body was simply acting as a vessel for the devil or another spirit as they did this. To this day, locals avoid this place and claim that there is a dark force that haunts it. Maybe it's the devil just sitting, waiting in this church for his next helpless victim to wander inside. Coming in at number 5, we have Orador Church in France. Located in central France, a few miles from Limoges lies a now abandoned town called Orador-sur-Glane. The town is now filled with empty houses, train lines that are out of order, and a sign of tragedy, with roadside walls pocked with bullet holes
floors, fire marks, scorching stone houses, the church roof has gone through some massive explosion. This tragedy happened on June 10, 1944, when Adolf Dieckmann received information from members of the Vichy regime that SS officers had been captured and were being held by members of the French resistance at Orador-sur-Vaires. Dieckmann led his team to Orador-sur-Glane intent on revenge. Whether he went to Orador-sur-Glane instead of Orador-sur-Vaires on purpose or whether he mixed up the two towns because of the similarity in their names is something we will never know. The men of the village were quickly rounded up, then herded into a variety of surrounding barns and garages as the women and children were confined to the local church. Then a gas explosion was placed in the church and lit aflame. There was only a handful to survive the tragic accident that happened at the church of this town. With all the lives lost in the church and surrounding town of that night, it is said to be haunted by many spirits. As some witnesses report, as they stand at the church's windows at night, they see the dark spirits of the people who lost their lives walking through the ruined village's deserted streets. Others state they often smell the aroma of burning wood and flesh as it lingers over this abandoned village. Until recently, the new residents would leave gifts along the border of the village of the martyred as a peace offering for the spirits that still haunt the church. In the end, we will never actually know the reason behind the attack upon the Orador church on June 10, 1944, though some think there was an evil entity or spirit upon the church that coerced the attack to happen. Coming in at number 4, we have St. Mary the Virgin, England. In an English village, you'll find the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, built around 1350 just outside the main settlement. The church in Clophill, Bedfordshire was abandoned for around 170 years after it fell into disuse in the 1840s. There are a few odd things about this ancient little church, the most significant being that it was supposedly built facing the wrong direction. Churches are traditionally oriented to face east, the direction from which the sun rises, which in the Christian religion is associated with the location of heaven and the return of the Messiah. Churches are positioned with the altar facing east so people will pray in that holy direction. Some have claimed that because St. Mary the Virgin Church faces away from God, it thus opens its doors to hell. Indeed, the church has a long history of reported hauntings and supposed satanic rituals. The 14th century church was reportedly used for satanic rituals in the 1960s. As rumor has it, bones were dug up and arranged in satanic patterns. A paranormal investigator has speculated that some kind of black magic was performed at a church in Clophill, making it one of the most haunted places in Bedfordshire. The investigator explained that there's definitely something strange going on at the church, and this personal view is that it's down to black magic practices held there. He explains that he has also had many people confess the terrifying experience that they've had with the church. One filmmaker told the investigator that he saw a dark shape that was extremely tall coming towards him. The filmmaker and his colleague ran when he felt something grab his arm, even though he couldn't see anything. Once police arrived to the scene, instead of laughing the claim off, they congested that they've spent a lot of time guarding the abandoned site, as many people experienced the same thing. Over the years, many people have reported seeing strange things near the church, from mysterious hooded monks to tall dark figures. In at number 3, we have Egg Hill Church, Spring Hills, Pennsylvania. Considered one of the most haunted churches known to man, we have Egg Hill Church in Spring Hill, Pennsylvania. The church was built in 1860 and was out of use by the 1920s. The most well-known story about Egg Hill Church is of the great number of people that supposedly lost their lives. This occurred at the turn of the century in the 1800s, when the pastor at the time ended the life of his whole congregation by poison and kept them in the nearby woods. Other stories say that the pastor only ended the life of the people of the parish. He reportedly would end their lives one by one under the mysterious circumstances and got away with it, until the day that he would be discovered, where he would end his own life in the church. Some who have been to the church say they have seen drawings of pentagrams and goats appear on the walls and ceilings, written by some unknown entity. Others say that from outside the church you can hear strange noises coming from the inside when the church is locked up and supposedly empty. Some claim the sounds are similar to children's voices. Therefore, there is no doubt that this haunted church has the potential to be cursed by the devil. In at number 2, we have a Episcopal Church in Virginia. This church is said to be one of the most haunted churches in Virginia. Legend says that the church and the church graveyard, which has graves dating back to 1738, are both home to paranormal activity that has taken place for over 200 years. Even the early years of the church being opened were marked with tragedy. In the mid-18th century, a woman was hiding from a group of men within the church's walls and lost her life. Even more upsetting was the fact that she was not discovered until years later, when the church reopened after the Revolutionary War. War. No one knows exactly the details of the loss, yet there have been several claims of paranormal activity since. Her hair just as blonde as the day she lost her life. At that time, the church had lost funding due to the Revolutionary War, and that might have been the reason why no one discovered her body until later. Moreover, it's been said that blood stains from the murder remained on the floorboards for nearly 100 years, till it was replaced altogether with concrete. Many ghost stories worked their way through the community after the skeleton was discovered. Many parishioners refused to set foot in the church after dark. In the 1900s, people decided to seek evidence of hauntings for themselves. Many returned with chilling tales of having encountered an unfriendly presence. Built before the Civil War, this church is reportedly visited by the ghost of a soldier killed during the conflict. The most haunted part of the building is the church tower. Others claim that the reason for the haunting involves a young woman who was murdered there. The eerie lights and unexplained sounds are reason enough to stay away after dark. Even today, there is plenty of paranormal activity associated with the church grounds. Many visitors have reported hearing footsteps running through the graveyard accompanied by the sound of a violent struggle. Others claim to see the figure of a young golden-haired woman peering from the balcony window. With all the tragedies and loss of lives that happen within the walls of this church, not to mention the paranormal activity, it's safe to assume that there is some evil spirits and energy cursing the church. And finally, in at number 1 we have St. Colin Kyle, Ontario. Dating back to 1855, St. Colin Kyle Church was founded and located in the hamlet of Uptergrove. The original frame church was torn down and the present brick edifice was constructed in 1905. This structure sits on a hill far back from the road and can easily be viewed when driving on Highway 12 east from Aurelia. The ghost stories have been spreading since over 100 years ago, classifying the church was haunted, and these tales have been circulated ever since. Today, the church is deemed haunted by some local residents and visitors. There have been many reports of ghost sightings, shadowy figures that will suddenly appear, creaking doors and eerie music that will play randomly from the organ. There have also been numerous reports of shadowy sightings of a figure wearing a black hat that floats through the choir area, creating chills for those who had observed it. Mysterious candlelight has been seen flickering from the windows on stormy nights. Many believe the spirit responsible is that of a former priest who, according to legend, pledged to complete a specific number of sermons, though he lost his life before he was able to attain that number. Now some churchgoers say he is returning to fulfill that promise. In at number 5 we have the Chapel of Ease. Located on St. Helena Island, which is part of the British Overseas Territories, we have the Chapel of Ease. During the colonial period, Chapels of Ease was constructed by farmers as a house of worship because their farms were located so far from the churches. This one was built using tabby construction between 1742 and 1747 and served the island farmers who were members of the parish church of St. Helena. It was once known as the White Church, as the combination of oyster shells and lime caused the structure to appear to glow white. Services came to a halt at the chapel after it was heavily damaged in a forest fire in 1886. The church was virtually abandoned when the farmers evacuated the island in the fall of 1861. During the federal occupation of St. Helena, the church was used frequently by several of the northerners who had come to the island to educate and train the freedmen. It was also used as a sanctuary by Methodist freedmen as early as 1868. To this day, the church is empty, left just as it was the last day of service. There have been many reports of hauntings in the chapel from explorers visiting the abandoned building. To start, the atmosphere of the church has been described as heavy, creepy, and hushed with the passing of time, while some visitors have even reported hearing whispers, prayers, and singing coming from the interior of the chapel. Others claim to have heard names being shouted in the silent burial ground and from the surrounding forests. Others have also said to have witnessed a lady shrouded in white walking among the tombstones with her family. Moreover, other visitors have witnessed a number of ghostly occurrences on the grounds, while individuals have reported strange sensations when walking through the church's graveyard. Not only that, visitors have seen ghostly figures of people dressed in 18th century clothing. In at number 4 we have Bolly Rectory. Established in 1862, the building was originally built as a house for the residences of the parish rector. The earlier rectory had burned down to the ground in 1841 and then was replaced in 1862. Bolly Rectory itself is a tiny rural community in Essex that had 110 inhabitants at its peak. Now just a shell of a rectory left abandoned. Now the ghost stories don't start once the building was abandoned, but there had been claims of ghostly activity on the site from as early as 1819, with a shadowy nun being seen gliding across the ground where the rectory was built. By the time the Bull family moved in, there were reports of the sound of rushing water in the house and bells ringing from unknown sources. There were also reports of disembodied sounds of crashing, knocking and heavy footsteps in empty areas of the building. As with so many cases of alleged poltergeist activity, much appeared to be in the daughter of Ethel's room, being the subject of many hauntings. In 1900, Ethel saw what looked like a nun hiding in the trees, and as they reached out to the nun, the figure dissolved in front of her very eyes. As years passed, household items went missing. There started being mysterious messages appearing on the walls of the home. With the increase of hauntings, the owners hired a paranormal investigator of Harry Prince, after years of not being able to find a new owner as people were scared that the church was cursed. In at number 3, we have Most Holy Trinity Church. The Most Holy Trinity Church can be found in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. With the present-day church is the third church built upon the grounds and was established in 1885. The church is known to be built on a site that had been a cemetery prior to being a church. Legend has it not all of the bodies were removed from the cemetery and that the souls of those who remain continue to inhabit the site. Not only that, but a number of people have mysteriously died while praying in the church since its doors first opened in 1885. Thus, those souls are also said to roam throughout the church building. Because of this, the lights in the church have also been known to go on and off without any reasonable explanation. At night, it is said that voices and the sounds of people walking back and forth can be heard in the building. It's been reported that priests who live in the rectory have continued to reserve the space as a guest room ever since the hauntings started, as no one has ever been willing to live in it on an ongoing basis. Guests report having heard strange noises and the sound of a person walking back and forth while trying to sleep in the room. Phantom footsteps have also been heard on the staircases in the buildings, and the dogs who were once kept as pets in the rectory would stare in a trance-like state down the basement stairs, as well as into the dining room when the building got cold. With the number of souls trapped in the building and scary ghost stories throughout the years, it's hard not to believe that this church is cursed by the devil. In at number 2, we have the Abbey of the Black Hag. The Abbey of the Black Hag lies in the centre of the West Limerick in Ireland. It has been a source of paranormal and archaeological intrigue for centuries. It is named after Catherine D. O'Connell and was originally thought to be 13th century due to Vatican records. However, it may be 100 or so years older than this. St. Catherine's Augustinian Abbey was one of the few medieval convents in Ireland during the 1290s. Pope Martin V closed the convent after the locals were terrified of one nun practicing black arts and witchcraft within the abbey, which is known as the Black Hag cell. Due to the black magic performed on the grounds, it said that it brought bad fortune to the local population. The malevolent abbess was left to live out her days in the damp, deserted abbey. Due to the depraved conditions and her twisted practices, over time her skin blackened to such a degree that it gave rise to the local name for the convent, the Abbey of the Black Hag. While it's said that one ghost that haunts the convent is the Countess of Desmond, who was buried alive under the church's altar. Sightings of her menacing ghostly figure prompted an investigation of her grave, while visitors say you can hear her screams and scratching the stone to escape in the early mornings throughout the ruins of the abandoned church. And finally, in at number 1, we have St. Louis Cathedral. The cathedral located on Jackson Square, St. Louis Cathedral is actually the 4th cathedral built upon its current location. The cathedral is the oldest continually operating cathedral in America. The 2 buildings which used to house the congregation of St. Louis's cathedral were destroyed by unfortunate events. The first building used as the cathedral was lost to a hurricane in 1722, just 4 years after the city's official founding. The cathedral, which replaced the earliest structure, then burned to the ground in New Orleans' Good Friday fire in 1788. The third itinerary of St. Louis's cathedral was built in 1794, but by mid-1800s the congregation decided that they wished to enlarge their parish church. Thus the 4th version of St. Louis Cathedral went up in the 1850s. Perhaps the most famous ghost associated with the St. Louis Cathedral is that of Père Antoine. Père was a Spanish Capuchin friar at St. Louis Cathedral. He arrived in New Orleans in 1774 and was named pastor. His generosity and kindness to the people of New Orleans made him very popular. He was well liked by all of New Orleans. His death on January 19, 1829 was met with a somber and mourning city. He was laid to rest inside the St. Louis Cathedral 3 days after his death. Since his death in 1829, the ghost of Père Antoine had been seen in St. Louis Cathedral by an untold number of people. His ghost is easily recognized as there is a portrait of him inside of the cathedral. It seems as though the ghost of Père Antoine especially likes to show himself around the holiday seasons. Commonly, the ghost of Père Antoine is seen near the altar and on the balconies. Interestingly, the ghost has been seen in other areas of the city as well, especially in the alley next to the cathedral. In addition to that, the ghost of Pierre, there are other famous ghosts associated with St. Louis Cathedral. Some of the ghosts ghosts which are said to haunt St. Louis Cathedral, like that of Père Dagobert, who became pastor of St. Louis Cathedral in 1745. On quiet evenings after worship, people have seen the ghost of Dagobert walking the aisles of the cathedral, his head down to the ground, walking silently in sandals.